Today we're talking about Chord desktop DACs, in particular the Qutest and its big brother, the Hugo TT2. Let's start with this little jewel, the Qutest by Chord Electronics out of the UK. I'm sure there's a flag on here somewhere. There you go. Made in Britain. So a little block of aluminum here. So I came to this DAC after the Denafreps Aries 2, and what brought me to this DAC from that DAC was the continued search for something that was very musical and natural. But I think what I was lacking in the Aries was some of the sharper definition of detail, some of the more defined edges to sounds, and some of the space in between those sounds that I think, for me personally, is really exciting. I think when I initially started getting into DACs, I didn't have a ton of faith that the money you put into DACs was worth the sound you got out of them. And to a certain degree, I still feel that way. I still feel that money should go into the headphones and the amp probably more than it should go into the DAC. But I have learned a lot about the importance of the digital analog converter, what it does, and the impact it can have on the sound. And it's pretty dramatic. And I think the Chord stuff is a real benchmark, and I mean, I'm probably late to the party on this, but it's a real benchmark sound because you get this incredible amount of sort of detail and distinction in the elements that you're listening to, but you don't, in my experience, you don't end up sacrificing a musicality. And some other things I've heard, like some of the THX stuff and whatnot, it's even more separated, it's even more defined, but it sort of falters for me in that it doesn't give you something that is, it becomes too analytical. It becomes too much of an exercise of listening to the details rather than listening to the music. And I think for me personally, the Chord stuff really strikes a balance. The Chord line ranges from the little Pocket Mojo, which I'm going to review at some point because that thing is amazing, up to the Dave, which is $9,000 or $10,000 reference DAC with a headphone amp built in. Sort of in the middle of the line, you've got the Hugo 2, which is a big portable, which can also be very at home on a desk. You've got the Qutest, which is sort of like the non-portable version of the Hugo. And then you've got the Hugo TT 2, which is the bigger desktop one we'll talk about in a minute. And like I said, you go up to the Dave and whatnot. The spread of money is insane, from $500 for the Mojo up to $10,000 for Dave. It's sort of mind-boggling, and Chord makes much more expensive stuff than that. I had read so much about the Chord stuff, and it just kept coming up, and every time I'd see a picture of it, it'd have these crazy colored lights, and it just felt very gimmicky. The industrial design and the layout is just kind of bucks all the norms in the industry, which normally I like that, but it just felt it felt forced and weird. And so I kind of had this emotional reaction where I didn't really want to get into it, but I just seen it so many times. I'm like, all right, I'm going to get a used Qutest. I'm going to give it a listen. I'll give it a fair comparison. And going back and forth with the Aries, for me, the Qutest had a lot to offer in terms of additional detail retrieval and just a sort of more refined sound without, again, like I said, sort of throwing out the warmth and the musicality. And I found it sort of addictive in A/B back and forth. I'm like, all right, well, I don't want to like this thing. I kind of, I was really hoping I'd get it, and I'd just be like, I knew it. It was wacky, and just sell it on, because the resale on this stuff is great, so it's very easy to sell on. But no, I really ended up sort of fallen in love. And I think what's cool about this unit over like the Hugo 2 is beyond some of the cost savings is just that it does feel a little bit more at home on the desk. It's a little bit more intentional in terms of how you interface with it when it's sitting on a table or when it's sitting in a rack in your 2-channel setup. There's some subtle additional differences, like Chord talks about the USB being, you know, better on this version than the Hugo for whatever reasons, isolation and blah blah blah. This guy has the BNC connections in, so that if you wanted to run it with the M scaler, which is Chord's crazy upsampling magic box that I haven't listened to personally, but people I've talked to who've listened to it, you know, say it's very magical, especially for sources that are lower quality. Yeah, so it's just maybe a bit more set up to sit on a desk, but you can't take it with you. It's got no power. It's got no headphone amp, so it's really a standalone DAC and a rather expensive one at that. So let's talk about its big brother. All right. This beefy guy is the Hugo TT2. I don't know where Chord comes up with its naming conventions. They're super wacky, just like their playful designs. So this guy is the big brother, in theory, a more sophisticated DAC, and really that's what it's sold as, is a very high quality DAC. But this also has a built-in headphone amplifier, and it's got some interesting things. One, Chord decided to stick with single-ended, which, you know, I've been sort of taught, you know, trained up to believe that balanced is always better, but, you know, I don't know if that's 100% true. It'll run 2 headphones at the same time. It's got a 3.5mm jack as well for your IMs or whatnot. It's got a very simple set of controls. It's got standard Chord wackiness with this giant glowing orb in the middle and a little tiny screen readout over here. On the back, you've got balanced out. So one of the big differences between this unit and the Qutest is that it will run balanced outputs. It's got your BNC in again. It's got a couple optical ends. It's got USB. Blah 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 blah. Runs off a more substantial power supply, which is an interesting thing about the Qutest. One thing I read but didn't get into is actually one of the few upgrade paths for it is to get a better power supply, which people really claim makes a difference. That stuff's hard for me to get into, but whatever. I'm already fallen down this rabbit hole anyway, so why not? So I was interested in this unit because most of the time when I'm listening, I'm listening to a tube-based amplifier, and so really what I need upstream is just a DAC. But I really like the idea of having a solid-state amp, just because there are certain types of music, certain times where I really value the simplicity of it and sometimes the cleanliness of it. I think that after lots of listening to lots of things, I've recognized that tubes generally sound better to my ear, to what I like. That's what I run in my stereo setups, and that's what I ended up running in my headphone setups. But there are times where solid state is really great, and so like especially when your tube amp breaks. So I wanted to have an amp on my desk, and I've sort of tried some integrated stuff in the past and didn't really like it. Always liked the freedom of having the DAC and the amp be separate, but I was really curious to see what Chord would do if it owned both the DAC and the amplifier circuitry, and so I wanted to try this guy out. And also I was curious to see, as a DAC alone, just as a DAC, how do these two units compare. So we'll start with the DAC portion of it. I think that the Qutest gets you about 90 to 95% of what the Hugo TT2 gets you in terms of just a DAC. I think the differences to my ears were that the Hugo TT2 adds a bit more definition and a bit more separation. It starts to get, honestly, a little bit more analytical, but it's still musical. And when I'm running it with a tube amp, which adds a lot of warmth back in, it's a really nice combination for me. So it sort of brings up that clarity, brings up that detail, finds a little more to just pull out, a little more data to pull out than the Qutest. But if all you wanted was a DAC, there's no way I could recommend this over the Qutest. There's just the cost delta to the quality delta is like law of diminishing returns big time. That being said, is it a better DAC? To my ear, yes. Now, as an amp, there is no comparison because the Qutest does not have an amp. So the amp, I think, is really, really good. It's incredibly clean, super dark black backgrounds, very powerful. I've thrown everything I have at this thing, from the 600 ohm DT880s to the Argon Mark III, all the hard to drive stuff and the easy to drive stuff, and it makes everything sing. It's a little bit tidy. It's a little bit, it's what if just going back and forth to my tube amp, there's a pretty dramatic difference there. But I think you could very happily just have this unit and just listen to it. I mean, it's really good. It's got a bunch of battery cells inside here to sort of do power management, and so it feels super stable and clean across the board. And yeah, there's really nothing to fault, aside from the fact that for me personally, maybe it's a little bit precise. It's a smidge analytical, but I think there's still a lot of warmth there in the amp, and in a DAC that is retrieving detail at this level and definition at this level, I think it's still a very musical listening experience. So if you just want a really amazing DAC, the Qutest is a phenomenal piece of kit, and one that really holds its value. So buy one used, try it out. If you don't like it, pass it on. You'll take a very small hit, hopefully. If you do want an all-in-one unit and you're just searching the vapors for those little last bits of detail, then the TT is really cool. It's a really cool piece of kit. I'm keeping it for now. I'm letting the Qutest go. So that's where I sort of end up in this whole spectrum. But it's an insanely expensive piece of gear, very hard to justify, and I will probably sell it on in the not too distant future to fund other things that I want to hear. So yeah, Chord, wanted to hate it, ended up loving it. Yeah, not much more to say. Oh, I will say one thing. There's always something more to say. This knob, so all these things light up. I should have them plugged in, but you can go find images of them. Chord has this whole like rainbow color system to tell you what bit rate you're getting into the DAC and what filters you have on and whatnot. And yeah, so on the Hugo, this is the volume knob, and it's really great actually. So the way I actually run this in front of the tube amp is as a preamp. So instead of just running it as a pure DAC with a steady power out, I run it as a preamp, and I leave the tube amp completely turned up, because that basically makes the attenuator, sort of the volume knob, it just kind of bypass, doesn't really affect the circuit anymore. And this has a very subtle, very easy to control volume with a lot of subtlety to it. And it does the whole rainbow trick, which is kind of goofy, but it's super helpful, because if you switch headphones, more than like remembering a number or remembering to even check where you have the volume set, you sort of look over and you're like, oh, it's blue, yikes, that's super cranked up right now, and I'm going to my really sensitive headphones. That triggers me that I gotta go adjust the volume. So I like at a desktop too, just how kind of smooth and easy it is. So it's a strange little bit of usability that I wasn't expecting out of it. The other difference between these two is that the Hugo TT2 has some crossfade filtering where it can basically bring the left and right channel together in a way that gives you a slightly more speaker-like listening to experience from headphones. So it moves, it sort of moves the sound signature from on either side of you to up in front of you, kind of like the experience you get as speakers sort of combine if you've got them set up in your room right, where they sort of combine and you start to be able to picture the singer in front of you and the band off to the right and left. It kind of does that, and you can crank it up and down by I think 3 or 4 degrees, and that's actually pretty darn cool. I thought that'd be a little gimmicky, but I really do like it on some genres and some headphones. It kind of like makes it. They both have another set of sort of just filters that are incredibly subtle to my ear, from like very neutral to in theory somewhat warmed up, but it's like subtle. Okay, so like I said, there's nothing else to say except what I just said, and that's the end of what I'll say. Signcraft, signing out.